So we're now live.
Okay.
Let's start.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning on your time. Good evening on ours. Now it's
Yes.
yeah, around 8 p.m.
Okay, and it's 10 o'clock a.m. here in California.
It's nice to have you for the first time
Thank
in a web meeting. For us, it's the
Thank
first time to do this. As a practical using Zoom. Normally, we use Instagram in Kuwait.
Okay. Okay.
So let's say what's going on in Kuwait. I'll just tell you that we have now a curfew from around 6 p.m. till from 5 p.m. till 6 a.m. in the morning. So we don't go out. So I'm meeting with you from home, and everything is just fine. We have only one death in Kuwait, and the numbers are increasing, but in an easy flow.
Okay. I'm glad to hear the numbers are very low.
Yeah, and because because of the curfew and the precautions that the Ministry of Health is taking in connection with the WHO, it's getting better in Kuwait. I think so. Just we were waiting for, as the whole world is waiting for the medicine,
Well, the situation in California is that we have been in what they call a lockdown for about a month now, which means that we are not supposed to leave our homes except for essential reasons such as shopping, going to the drugstore, but we're not supposed to be seeing friends. We can take a walk, but when we take a walk, we have to stay 6 feet away from other people, and many of the parks and trails have been closed so to avoid people congregating. We have had hundreds of deaths in the Bay Area in Northern California, unfortunately, but the numbers have been kept lower than was originally predicted because of our measures. And I'm just today starting to hear glimmers of hope. The numbers of deaths in the United States are predicted to be lower than originally forecast. And our head of medical, the chief medical officer who's handling the situation for the United States government has indicated we might, maybe, be able to have a normal summer with vacations and travel. Although he's not promising anything, we'll have to wait and see.
But that's a bit of hope.
Yes, and a bit of hope is very important these days.
Yeah.
As we stay inside and try to keep our spirits up.
Yeah, sure. We also we don't leave our houses. Coming to this issue, unless necessary, as you said, courts are closed except for the hearings for the people who are in prison, and the hearings for the people who break the curfew. So the police stations are open. We have juvenile are working. Other than that, we have a problem with the courts closed. We are trying now to get connected through the internet, and we have, a proposal to the Council of Ministers to work with courts on net. As I understand that, in the U.S., the Constitution has to be that for I just saw your video today. The jury, they need to be in one room. So
yes, so in the United States, in many places, not everywhere, but in many places, the courthouses are closed.
Yes.
But we have been able to continue with hearings and proceedings by telephone and sometimes by video on Zoom or other media. And that has kept the system moving forward. I'm still working on briefs that we submit to the court. I've participated in hearings in front of the judge, but we were all at home, just simply on telephone. The problem that we are facing right now is that our system in the United States is, as you just said, based on the jury system. And in both civil and criminal cases, and these are constitutional rights that there is no exception for. And for a jury trial, that has to be done in person. We have to have everybody, the jurors in a room listening to the evidence. We control very carefully what evidence they hear. They cannot hear evidence other than what is produced in the courtroom before before the defendant and the prosecution, or before the plaintiff and the defendant in a civil case. And then they are supposed to deliberate in private, and as you've seen in the movies, probably in a room which they are locked in, and they are not supposed to be influenced by anybody talking to them about the case. And all of that we cannot do over the phone and by internet. And so that is starting to cause a problem. Jury trials can be delayed a month maybe, and that's what's happened. But if it goes on for much longer, we have a saying, justice delayed is justice denied. And at some point, even in civil cases, the delay becomes very problematic. As you mentioned, in criminal cases where a defendant is in jail until his or her trial, it becomes urgent, and the person is absolutely entitled to a trial before he or she spends too much time in jail. So the problem is just beginning to bubble up because we've been in this situation for a few weeks. But if this continues for a few months, then we're going to have a very serious issue that lawyers around the country will be paying a lot of attention to, and we may have to find some alternative means, whether it's doing the trial while social distancing or finding some other alternative. That's going to become an important issue.
So we're not going to see a constitutional amendment for this situation.
No, a constitutional amendment in the United States is extraordinarily difficult, requires consent of the states. I forget what number, but some number of states, and a very high vote. And we don't amend our Constitution lightly. And there is no exception to the Constitution for this kind of situation. So at some point, we will have to see some special actions taken by the courts. I will mention that in one case I read about, a judge who was supposed to have the defendant sentenced by the jury decided to do it himself. And he just said, under these extraordinary circumstances, I have no choice. But I suspect that when that sentence then gets appealed, it will be reversed. And it will only be appealed if the defendant thinks that the sentence was worse than he would have gotten if the jury had sentenced him. So we don't know if it'll be appealed at all.
Yeah,
time will.
Yeah, we have the civil and the commercial code in Kuwait. We amended some parts of it to make this vacation or holiday not to be calculated within the days that you need to file a case in.
Yes, we have many similar provisions.
Yeah,
yes.
we just made it like a week ago. And it helped in this situation. The legislations in Kuwait are going a little bit faster because of the situation. I see in Kuwait and in other countries, there is a problem with, the salaries of the people who are working, since some companies, some lawyer firms, they cannot work unless they are at their office. And since the government's advice to stay at home, but in Kuwait, it's compulsory. So they need to stay at home and not work in their workplaces. So how are you tackling this in these states?
So in the United States, there have been two provisions so far by the federal government to deal with the business problems of smaller businesses, and especially, which include law firms. There is a $1,200 payment that is going to go out to every individual who earns less than some amount of money. I think it's $75,000 a year. So that should help many of our staff and others who are under that threshold. But there's also a new small business loan program. We have, the government is making available up to $8 million in loans to small businesses. In order to qualify, they can only have 500 employees or less, and they have to certify that unless they get this loan, they will not be able to continue functioning in the same way, that they will have operations affected, like having to lay off people. And you have to agree that if you accept the money, you will not lay off anybody until, I think there's this deadline, June 30th.
Oh,
So you both have to certify that you need the money and that you will not lay anybody off, and then you're entitled to this loan. And that, we believe, will be helping some of the smaller law firms that face the situation you're talking about.
yeah, that's a good solution. And now, is it in practice now? Do the people apply now?
Yes, it just came online Monday of this week. And there have been some, not surprisingly, some glitches and difficulties in signing up, because almost every small business around the country jumped on the website to sign up. And but it's supposedly working out, but it is in place this week, and we're following how well it's going on the news.
And that's excellent. And we
Yeah.
have another problem now that's coming up. There are some, because of the lockdown and the shutting down of the airports, some countries are refusing to accept their citizens. So because of the, of the COVID-19, like we have a shutdown in Kuwait airport, and there are a lot of people want to go back to their countries, but their countries are not accepting them. So by law, how do you see to tackle this situation?
Well, that's interesting. In the United States, Americans are able to fly back to the United States, but you're suggesting that maybe there are people here stuck in the United States who can't get back to their countries because their countries are not letting them in. I haven't heard that problem. Our airports are open for the most part. And while flights have been severely reduced, especially overseas flights, there are still some flights that are going. I have not heard about a problem in the United States with people wanting to leave who are not able to get back into their countries. It would seem to me the countries have an obligation to accept at least their citizens, maybe subject to some health restrictions, such as I know there are some countries that are quarantining people coming back into the country. I think China was doing that. I think the US was doing that. Yeah, but Kuwait maybe as well. It makes sense, but I have not heard of that problem. And that seems to me a serious international law problem. If people are not being accepted back into their own country under any circumstances. Hopefully that will not last.
Yeah, I think we are facing it, and we will be facing it if the lockdown of the airports will continue because of the health problems, not because of anything else.
Well, let me mention that, these issues that you're talking about and that we face in the United States are very important. And it seems to me this is a time when lawyers like you and me, but lawyers around the world, need to band together to make sure that the public health considerations are properly balanced against the rule of law considerations. They're both important. And nobody else is there to do it except lawyers and judges. And we have to have conversations like this to make sure we keep on top of what's happening around the world. As you know, the Union of International Lawyers that you and I are both members of, the UIA, and of which I am president this year, is very concerned about these issues. We're going to be hosting a webinar on this very issue in the coming weeks with our sponsor LexisNexis on the issue of the infringement of the rule of law that's being caused around the world by these restrictions. And while we all recognize the restrictions of some sort are necessary, making sure that courts remain functioning, that people have access to the justice system is also very critical. And it's up to us to engage on those issues. So that's why I'm so happy to be talking about these issues with you and hearing about what's happening.
You covered my next question about the rule of law and the UAE's role in this situation. You just answered it.
Well, let me, yeah, I didn't mean to jump ahead, but it is so important because I've always believed that the lawyers and the lawyers around the world create a community. When
Yeah.
I travel as president of UIA, I'm so excited to be able to meet members of my same community everywhere that I travel, and to be welcomed by them, and to be able to see their legal systems, and to talk the same language, even if we don't talk the same language. Um, but this is an area, this issue, the coronavirus, has given rise to a situation where that relationship and that community becomes even more important, because there is a wonderful health community looking out for public health around the world. There needs to be a law community, lawyers around the world looking out for the rule of law and making sure that all of our lawyers are able to get access to the legal system, partly for their own, partly because it's important to maintain their business, but more importantly, because we have to worry about our citizens and beyond, and not citizens, people who need to have access to the legal system for a whole host of reasons, like the people you mentioned who might be stuck in a foreign country and not able to get home, or people like you mentioned who might be arrested because they're accused of having violated a curfew. We
Yeah.
can't have a system where they don't have access to justice. That turns the whole world into tyranny. And while it's important to maintain public health, it's not an excuse to deprive people of a justice system.
Yes, as you said, justice delayed is justice denied. So, and as coming to this situation, I've heard and read about it that the WHO cooperated with the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, to see the COVID effects on the small businesses. I like the idea, but it would have been more nice if the UIA with the WHO also cooperated.
Yes, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things that the UIA is doing is we are reaching out to non-legal organizations
Mhm.
to, first of all, to at least offer our viewpoint, because we think the viewpoint of lawyers is really critical and has to be taken into account. But beyond that, we can also harness our members' ability to put together proposals and suggestions and reports. And we are doing all of that. We're gathering reports from all over the world. We have a LinkedIn website
Yes,
where we have 150 members who are reporting on the situation. We're also able, working with LexisNexis on this webinar, to gather more information. And I 100% agree with you. When we have the necessary information and hear about situations that require intervention, we
yes,
will do so. We've been writing letters, but we need to do more. And I think coordinating with WHO and bar associations around that's another important area. To me, this is an obligation imposed on bar associations around the world.
yes,
I'm so glad to be talking to you as a representative of the Kuwaiti Bar Association, but we also, I've been in touch with our San Francisco, our local bar, our California bar, and through the ABA, which is also very active, through our national bar. And this has to happen around the world.
I just want to explain to the viewers that we have a collective member in the UIA, a collective members as bars they can connect with the UIA, and maybe
Yeah.
we would like to join with the head of the collective member center.
Yes. So we are, yes, as you mentioned, in the UIA, in addition to individual members, we have several hundred what we call collective members, which are primarily bar associations from local areas and also other legal associations. And one of the things we are planning is a Zoom meeting among our collective members in order to exchange ideas and see what's happening and see whether we can put together a program. And I know there has been real interest expressed by our collective members to engage on this issue. You know, it's funny, we were always looking for the issue, that would bring together our collective members. And, you
It
know,
came.
life provided one this year. Life provided the silver lining of this terrible situation, which I don't minimize at all. And I don't want to seem like a Pollyanna seeing everything in bright colors. I know it's a devastating situation. But there have been some benefits that have arisen from it. One is it has brought the world's lawyers together. And the other is that we are doing something like this, which we would not have been doing last week. And it
Right.
enables, right, that we wouldn't have done.
Yeah, as a collective member, the Kuwait Bar Association has joined the UAE as a collective member. Last year, we had invited Mr. Yusuf Badihio in Kuwait, and we met in in person. But this year we
Yes.
couldn't make it, so we're just meeting across the web, which is easier and less expensive and less time consuming also.
Right. There's advantages and disadvantages. It's nice to be in the same room. It's nice to share a cup of tea like I'm drinking right now. But it's also, this is something you and I were able to set up in 24 hours. And it's something we could do again easily. And I think in its own way, it allows for closer contact and enables us to not worry about all of the logistics, which are an expense and a deterrent to doing something on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I just want to ask one more question. Maybe the timing now.
Sure.
Yeah, we have 10 to 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
we have two issues. One is the practicing lawyers issues, and the other one in-house counseling. They're
Yes.
facing now problems with practicing their jobs. So do you have anything about the situation in the US or in the UIA?
So we have a real focus on the special problems that face in-house lawyers. In the United States, it actually has not been a very big problem because they have been doing their jobs mostly at distance,
Yes.
by phone and Zoom meetings, et cetera. I have been on countless meetings with my in-house counsel at clients in the past couple of weeks. I just got off one right before I joined you, and I'll be jumping on one right after I leave you. So that is working well. The problem that I think they are facing is that they're, again, just as we were talking about, we are very much used to doing things in person. And it is, there's a closeness and a bond that's created by being in the same room and by talking about things together confidentially, et cetera. But right now that all has to be done online. So I would say in the United States, that has not been a particularly big problem. More globally though, the concern the UIA has about in-house counsel is that their status as lawyers varies so much from country to country. In some countries, they're considered full lawyers who are members of the bar, who have full right to the attorney-client privilege. In some countries, they have a different status. They are not considered members of the bar, and they do not have attorney-client privilege. And so their status is kind of halfway in between an employee and a lawyer. And that is causing problems, especially in this multi-jurisdictional global world that we're in, because one company might have branches in two places where their lawyers have different status. And the inconsistency, I think, is creating stress and tensions on in-house lawyers around the world. So we would like to see that situation regularized within the understanding every country has its own legal system. And of course, we don't mean to interfere with that, but we do want countries to be sensitive to the special needs of in-house lawyers, and especially in global business circumstances where a company might find itself in an incomprehensible situation because a lawyer working in one branch has a totally different status than a lawyer in a different branch.
Yeah, sure. And another question, with the circumstances, some legal systems see it as force majeure, and the others see it in a different way, as exceptional circumstances. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
We've been seeing it. We've been seeing it in the United States and elsewhere because we've been tracking this specific issue.
Mhm.
In some systems, it may qualify for force majeure, and that's how it's being argued about. And I think this issue will be litigated and subject to court decisions for years to come. We'll be employing lawyers to decide these issues for many years. In other countries, it's being talked about, or even in the same cases, but as another way of getting at the point, it's being considered as a condition precedent that might not be fulfilled for the contract to proceed. There's another doctrine called impossibility, that the contract is impossible to be filled.
Yes.
We've seen it come up in the context of mergers of companies where there's a clause for material adverse change, and they're called MAC clauses. And the question is whether the coronavirus constitutes a MAC clause that gives one party the right to drop out of a business deal or not. In terms of what the answer is, I have seen varied answers. I don't think we have a consistent answer yet. I have heard very strong arguments about why the coronavirus is a force majeure. It was unanticipated, it has dramatic effects, it was not part of what the parties contemplated. But I have also heard strong arguments about why it is not a force majeure. It's part of disease, is part of the human condition, and the parties should have taken that possibility into account. And it doesn't meet the requirement. It's independent of the parties, and so we'll see. I don't have the answer yet. If I did, I would.
Depends on which party you're representing. The pleadings of your briefs, it depends on which party.
Oh, it depends on whoever we're representing. We'll be on both sides of this issue, and of course the facts vary in every case, so it depends which side you might take depending on the facts of the case. But I should say the UIA, for example, we're going to be having a podcast on this exact issue, on force majeure, with one of our members from New York, Richard, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's going to be doing that, and we will be putting that out in the next couple of weeks. Steve Richmond.
So we will be waiting for the webinars from the UIA. I
Yes.
enrolled in 2 for next week.
Oh, wonderful.
On the 14th and 15th. So we're going to see what's going on, and we will be waiting to see the results of the situation.
Absolutely. Let's stay in touch. It's wonderful to be in touch with fellow lawyers in Kuwait. And with this, we don't have to wait a year to see each other.
Yes, sure. Thank you for your time, Mr. President. I'm happy to see you. We hope to see you in better, fortunate circumstances.
We will, I promise. Okay. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. See you.